don't mean to be impolite, but I'm just asking you to ditch your study guide for the next 3 weeks. Because they go through the entire book of Daniel in 3 weeks and just nitpick a little bit here and there. And it's a very important book. And so what I want to do is basically cover 4 chapters for each of the 3 weeks. I realize it's going to be an overview. We may not be playing all the verses on the audio. But again, the whole idea is to just give you the big picture. Because if you don't understand the book of Daniel, and I'm not the only one who said this, people who actually know the Bible say this, it's almost impossible to understand the book of Revelation. Daniel is to the Old Testament what Revelation is to the New Testament. And to be able to understand the book of Revelation, you remember, I had a little timeline on the board when we went through Revelation, and we called it Daniel's 70th week. And so we're going to be talking about that. Oh, and I didn't grab it. Vicki, right behind you on the organ, on the left-hand side, there's 2 sheets of paper that are printed off. And I'm going to need one of those too. If you could, if I printed these off for everybody, and I was going to do that. And again, when the power went out this morning, it's kind of like my brain went out the window. Obviously, my brain is powered on 110. I think I made enough for everybody to have. So, as we go through Daniel, I'm hoping that these are going to be helpful. Now, I downloaded them to the PowerPoint, but I thought, well, I don't want to haul everybody out to the sanctuary and put it on the projector, and yet I am certainly not artistic enough to draw all this on the board. And so I actually stole these off the internet. It's copyrighted material, but it was copyrighted back in 1919. So I think it's pretty much become...
The year my dad was born.
There's just something cool. When I visited with my mom, we visited one of her friends, and they had a poster on their wall that had
Yes.
on it,
Right.
and a whole bunch of other things.
Right, and I saw that online. It's pretty expensive, and I didn't think it would make it in time if I ordered it, but yeah, I saw that poster. Yeah,
It was pretty cool.
it is. I think in our church library, Patty's not here to confirm this, but we used to have this book by Clarence Larkin, and it had a lot of this stuff in it, and so you might want to look at it. But anyway, Daniel's 70 weeks we're not going to really get into too much until we get later into the book of Daniel. But the one that's going to be important today is the one that says the 5 great worldwide kingdoms, because Daniel has multiple visions. And I'm sorry this didn't print any clearer. But this morning, in chapter 2, we're going to see this vision of this Colossus. Okay? And so this gives us a little bit of an idea of the Colossus. And it also puts it in a little bit of a time frame. We'll get back to this in just a moment. But anyway, this is for you. And the other thing I wanted to point out is hopefully everybody got one of these. Okay? And there's some more over there, or there were. Anyway, if you take a look at yours, and you may not have brought it with you today, but on the back side, so there's 2 sides to this. So on the back side of it, if you take a look, you have there's a list of prophets on the very top line: Jonah, Amos, Isaiah, Hosea, Micah, and then you have Nahum, Jeremiah, Lamentations, etc. So these are actual writing prophets. And then you have the next line, you have the divided kingdom and exile, and then restoration of Jerusalem. So if you take a look at the next section down, that first big section, you'll see where the Israel, the northern kingdom, falls to the Assyrians, and then you see down below that there's Nahum, Jeremiah, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So this is where we are in the whole scheme of things. And again, that line along the top is 800 BC, 700 BC, 600 BC. So if you go down from that into Bible history, you'll see the last kings of Judah, and then right below that it says Judah, the southern kingdom falls to Babylon, temple and Jerusalem destroyed, 586 BC. So this is the period of time when Daniel lived. So again, if you've never studied the Old Testament before, you start with Genesis, with creation. You have the choosing of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob becomes the 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. They end up in Egypt. When they come back, they are actual tribes, and they actually form this nation. They are one group during the Judges. They demand a king, so they get King Saul. Saul fails. David is appointed. Solomon is his son. But when Solomon dies, the people rebel, and it divides into two kingdoms. So you have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is called Israel. The southern kingdom is called Judah. In 722 BC, the northern kingdom falls to the Assyrians. In 586 BC, you have a final destruction of Jerusalem. So Lisa's going to need those 2 sheets of paper too. So what you have when we go to Daniel chapter 1, this is prior to 586 BC. This is 605 BC. Remember, when you go backwards in the BCs, the bigger the number, the further back it is. The closer to the time of Christ, the smaller the number. So anyway, Nebuchadnezzar came down and captured Jerusalem and had some initial captives taken away to Babylon. And that's what you have in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel and his three friends, they are extremely bright, intelligent young men, and they're taken to Babylon, and they're put in the king's court to be trained to serve in the king's administration. But as a result, they're supposed to do what everybody else is supposed to do, and they say, no, we can't do that. So now, I'm just wondering, Mr. Sutherland, do you have Daniel chapter 1?
I do.
Could you play the first 10 verses?
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel,
I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink, for why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king.
Okay, we'll stop right there. So that sets the stage for the book of Daniel. So you have Daniel becoming a eunuch, and you understand what that means. in the court of the king. And again, Babylon had people from all over the empire that they brought in and they trained. These 4 men were supposed to be trained. And if you want to, you can come up later and read Daniel on the board here. And anyway, as the story goes, as you know, they eat what they believe they should eat, and at the end of the time, they are far better than all the other young men in this training program, and they are honored. Okay. So that sets the stage. Now, again, that's 605 BC. This talks about a 3-year period of time, 602 BC. So this is prior, apparently, to the eventual fall of Jerusalem, 586 BC. All right, in chapter 2 now, we have Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And again, that sheet that I gave you is going to refer to this statue, this Colossus. And the way it's made, the paper's made, it has to be printed on its side. But again, there are several different passages that deal with this issue. But this Colossus is going to be in Daniel chapter 2. And again, I realize it is very hard to read this, but this gives you a little bit of a picture at least. So if we could go to Daniel 2 now, and here is, are you able to isolate
where
the
we're
verses?
on this program.
Oh, good.
See, this is ESV. This
Okay.
Is not, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's going to be very helpful for the next 3 weeks. Okay. So could you first of all play verses 1 through 4 of chapter 2?
Daniel 2. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them,
I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream.
Okay. Stop.
Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic,
Okay, we'll stop right there. Because again, we're going to try to get this whole thing talked about this morning. So the issue here is what the king wants to know is impossible. He had a dream. It scared him to death. He wants an interpretation from his wise men. I'm going to call them the wise guys. By the way, little footnote. When Jesus was born, he was visited by whom?
Wise men.
Wise men out of the east. And it's very possible, according to some, that it was from this same company, years later, obviously, but those who had actually been exposed to the prophecies of the Hebrew people. Okay, just something to think about.
Kind of makes sense.
And by the way, where in the Bible does it say there were 3 wise men?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Talk about 3 gifts. So it could have been a whole cadre of wise men. And so, anyway, so the king summons these wise men and says, I want you to tell me my dream, and then I want you to interpret it. And they're saying, well, we can't do that. If you tell us your dream, then we can try to give you an interpretation. He says, no, you don't understand. You have to tell me the dream so that I know that this has been revealed to you, and then give me the interpretation. Well, when they say that's impossible, well, he's ready to lop off their heads. Again, this is Nebuchadnezzar before his conversion, you might call, in chapter 4. Okay? So if we could move to verse 19. Well, actually, I'm trying to think how much time we've got here. Well, okay, we're going to skip that. Again, I'm trying to fit everything in here. I'd encourage you to, on your own, read the first 4 chapters, and next week read the next 4 chapters of the book of Daniel. But basically, they go to Daniel and tell him what's going to happen, and he goes, oh my goodness, we're all going to be killed. He prays about it, and God reveals to him what this dream is. Okay. So now we have the interpretation of that. Okay, so could you move to verse 31?
Sure.
So Daniel presents himself to Nebuchadnezzar and lets him know that the God of heaven has revealed this to him. So now if you could read or play verses 31 through 45.
You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, all together were broken in pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom, inferior to you, shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And, like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And, as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Perfect. I'm glad you're able to isolate. Very good. All right, so this is what we're talking about here now. This sheet of paper with this Colossus laying on its side. Again, so we want to talk about the top part, not the bottom part, because the bottom part has to do with some further visions of Daniel. So it's interesting to me that God gives this vision to a heathen king. And according to this vision, until Jesus comes back, he was probably the most powerful ruler that history has ever known. And this is King Nebuchadnezzar. So you have in this Colossus, first of all, the head of gold. And it represents, if you take a look at that top line going across, number one, which kingdom? Babylon. The Babylonian kingdom. So the Babylonian kingdom was perhaps the most powerful kingdom that has ever existed in past history. Okay, so this is the head of gold. This is King Nebuchadnezzar. But according to Daniel's vision, they're not going to last. They're going to be defeated, and another nation is going to take their place that is powerful, but not as powerful. So we now go from the head of gold, which is the next metal? Silver. And silver even today is not worth as much as gold, is it? And so if you take a look at that chart, what is the kingdom of silver?
Medo-Persian.
The Medo-Persian Empire. And again, it's called the Medo-Persian Empire because it involved both the Medes and the Persians. So you have kind of a divided kingdom there during this period of time. And so they are then this chest of silver. They eventually will be replaced by another kingdom, which would be bronze or brass, which again is a less valuable metal. Okay, so it as well is less powerful. And according to your chart, who was the third kingdom?
Grecian.
Grecian. We have another name for that based on the ruler, which was
Alexander.
Alexander the Great. Exactly. So Alexander the Great comes out of Macedonia. He marches to the east, apparently all the way to India. Dies at the Ganges River with a broken heart because there's nothing more to conquer. Okay. But his kingdom was not as powerful because when he died, it was divided up between his generals. And you have the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies had the area around Egypt. The Seleucids had the area around what we would call Palestine today, and they battled with one another. And one of their rulers that came out of that kingdom was Antiochus Epiphanes. We'll talk about him later on in the book of Daniel. So after that, then another kingdom comes that is like iron. Okay, again, a less valuable metal, but very strong, used to break things apart. And iron represents which empire? The Roman kingdom. That's what it says on your chart there? Yeah. So that is Rome. Okay? And we know that Rome fell apart eventually from the inside out. And again, now this next section here represents the times of the Gentiles. If you take a look at the very bottom. And they have two divisions of the church age, the Eastern division, the Western division. I don't even want to get into that. But during this period of time, you do have this Islamic kingdom that does arise. But Daniel does not get into that in his vision. In fact, basically, you have the 70 weeks. Take out your other piece of paper. Okay, this other piece of paper here. So basically, you have a time out. If you take a look at that Daniel 70 weeks, you have Daniel 69 weeks, and then you have this pause, the gap between the 69th and 70th week, and then you have Daniel 70th week. We're going to get into this later. So basically, on the Colossus then, there is a pause between the kingdom of iron and then the kingdom of both iron and clay. Okay? So if you go all the way over, you have this last stage, and again, that's his idea of feet, I guess, or toes. So if you have, most normal people have how many toes?
10.
Depends on how many people, right?
He's a contractor, what can I say? Then there's strange people like me who have a inherited trait where 2 toes on both of my feet, the skin is joined together. So even though I have bones for toes, they act like webbed feet. So I'm very good at swimming.
That's why you had to come to Oregon. But you missed by about 20 miles.
You know, I'm going to duck that question.
Because he's quacked up.
So anyway, many people believe, many Bible scholars believe, that the vision that Daniel has of this restored iron and clay is the revised Roman Empire. And basically this is what you have today with this European Union coming about. Now, again, whether it has to be 10 actual nations or whatever, Bible scholars will debate, debate. But the fact is, it is not strong. It's very weak. And that's what you have going into the tribulation. You have the Antichrist trying to rule.
You know what? It sort of sounds like the EU.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it is, but it sure
Exactly.
sounds that way.
exactly. Oh, exactly. So then again, you have the second coming, and in Daniel's vision, you have this big rock that comes down and destroys these kingdoms, busts them all to pieces, and then grows into this large mountain. And again, Daniel talks about this coming kingdom, this coming empire. And again, I am very thankful that the Alliance left the word premillennial in our doctrinal statement, because I believe this is a premillennial vision right here of Daniel. That the time is coming when Jesus returns to the earth, and all of these great empires in the world history will be literally dust. And this great mountain will be God's kingdom, and Jesus will reign. All right. So we got to move quickly. You have the promotion of Daniel, and again, because King Nebuchadnezzar's impressed. Nobody else can tell him what his vision was, let alone interpret it. And again, that would be quite affirming if you were the king. Just think, wow, you're the head of gold. You know, you're the most powerful. All right, so let's move on to chapter 3. So that's on your board here. The image of gold. And this is a very, very famous story to many of you. So, would you play verses 1 through 6 of chapter 3,
Daniel
of the book of
3.
Daniel in the Old Testament?
King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud,
You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace.
Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up.
Okay, we'll stop right there for now. Thank you. Very good. That's working great so far. All right, so whether this goes to King Nebuchadnezzar's head, you know, he's been told this vision, he is the head of gold. Well, now he sets up this gigantic golden statue, and man, everybody's impressed, and they say, everybody should bow down and pray only to you during this period of time. Well, guess what? When we get down to verse 12, it says, there are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. So again, here are these 4 young men. Daniel's not mentioned at this point, but the other 3 are. And again, they're good Jewish young men. They've already taken a stand during their training period that they will not defile themselves with this unclean food. But now, they are not going to bow down before this image. And so, the idea is, all right, you've had your chance, and if you don't do it, you'll be cast into the fiery furnace. And so now, could you read or play verses 19 through 25, please?
Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent, and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors,
Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?
They answered and said to the king,
True, O king.
He answered and said,
But I see 4 men, unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods.
I love that. Yes, exactly. I was going to bring that up. If you've ever listened to any of the Gaither videos, there's a famous song. It was originally done by the Statesman, and then it's been redone for some of theirs. It's called The 4th Man in the Fire. And again, my version says, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. And my particular Bible version capitalizes Son and God. So, who do we believe this 4th personage was in the fire?
Pre-incarnate Jesus.
Exactly. Pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. These young men were faithful to God, were serving God, would not bow down. And this happens as a testimony. Now, even the guys who throw them into the fire are consumed. They're killed because they end up getting too close to the door of this furnace. And yet these 3 members.
I think of this story, how in the first part of Daniel, we see Daniel's faithfulness to the Lord, and how that's expressed. We might have thought, well, these 3 friends were just kind of following Daniel's lead, but here they're standing on their own.
Yes. Right. And later Daniel is going to have a lion experience.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, so could you then play, verse 26 to the end of the chapter? No, to verse, yeah, that chapter, verse 26.
Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared,
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here.
Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said,
Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way.
Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
So here you have this phenomenal story. Again, these are exiles, not only from Judah, but from Jerusalem. These are young men who probably would have ended up serving in the king's court in Judah. They are now captives. They're made eunuchs in this foreign nation, in a foreign culture, with a foreign language, with a foreign religion. And here is this downright idolatry, this golden image. They're told to bow down. They won't do it. And everybody's a witness. This is a group of powerful people. you've got the king, and you have all his main officials there to watch this execution of these young men who refuse to do what they're supposed to do. And yet, what is Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to this?
He says, wow, I didn't think that would happen.
Well, here's an interesting thing. How many men do they throw into the fire?
Three.
He says, I gotta see
How
four.
many men do they see in the fire?
Four.
How many men does he call out of the fire?
Three.
Isn't that interesting? He does not call for this fourth one that looks like the Son of God. He does not call for him. He just calls for the three. And they come out, and they're horribly burned and wounded, and they have to rush them off to the hospital, right?
Nope.
No, there's no evidence at all.
Hey, I just had, for my feeble brain, I got one. If we're with Jesus, the fires of hell will not touch us. I believe that's a beautiful picture. I'd never thought of it before. Wow.
Well, the other thing that is interesting is this is definitely an illustration of God providing in the midst of this. Again, I don't want to overplay my hand here, but they still got thrown into the furnace. They
They
still
did.
had to walk around in the furnace before they came out of the furnace.
Right.
And,
God proved that the fire was hotter because
oh yeah,
the other men died.
Exactly.
If they hadn't died, people might not have believed that it was as hot as it was.
So-
They were thrown in bound, but they came out loose.
they burned their cords, yeah,
Their ropes on, but not them.
exactly. So, again, without being overly spiritual about this, most of us would pray that we would never even end up near the furnace, let alone getting thrown into it. Okay. That would be our desire. But the end result was twofold. Number one, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Most people say Abednego. It's Abednego. Are not only protected, but God is glorified in the midst of the rulers of this evil nation. But God's not done with Nebuchadnezzar, and he is a fascinating figure to me. Because here is the most powerful ruler of the ancient history. An undisputed despot. Whatever his word was, it went. And yet, God uses him to punish Judah. But yet, God still has a concern for him, which is amazing. We're going to see this now in chapter 4 when we take a look at Nebuchadnezzar's conversion, his second dream, whatever you want to call this. So this is a long chapter. So, first of all, just verses 1 through 3.
I can make a quick comment
Yes.
that Nebuchadnezzar was not calling the fourth person out. Might have been the first sign that he was submitting to that power. He didn't have authority over that fourth person, but he knew it.
That's interesting.
Very possible.
He knew he didn't have any power over that fourth one. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Daniel 5.
4.
King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000.
Chapter 4 of the book of Daniel in the Old Testament of the Bible.
Daniel 4.
King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs! How mighty his wonders! His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
You have the most powerful ruler of the ancient world, this man who has destroyed all these other nations along the way, destroys Judah, destroys Jerusalem, destroys the temple, And now God is doing a work in his heart. And he's not a Jew. He is not a child of Abraham. And so again, to me, this is evidence, and I think the Jews have been blinded throughout the centuries, that God is concerned with all people, not just the Gentiles. And for instance, something you need to remember for you who have been doing your Through the Bible reading, do you realize that in the first few chapters of the book of Genesis, you have a 2,000-year period of time. And before God calls Abraham, there are no Jews. There is no Israel. There are no seed of Abraham. So in a sense, everybody was a Gentile during this first third of world history that the Bible describes. Because from Abraham to Christ is another 2,000 years. Realize that? You realize when you get to Genesis chapter 12, you are halfway through recorded human history as far as the Bible. Now, from Christ until now, we have approximately how much time?
2,000.
Another 2,000 years. So there's only been a period in the middle where God has specifically been dealing with his people. Now he's not done. And if you have been doing your Through the Bible reading, if you're reading Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11, you'll know that God is not done with that people. So, anyway. All right, so he has this vision. Just because of the sake of time, let's move over to verse 19. And
Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was dismayed for a
27.
while, and his thoughts alarmed him. The king answered and said,
Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you.
Belteshazzar answered and said,
My lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. The tree you saw, which grew and became strong, so that its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, and in which was food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. And because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven, and saying, Chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field, and let him be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king. It is a decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king, that you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and you shall be wet with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will. And, as it was commanded to leave the stump of the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be confirmed for you from the time that you know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity.
So, if you go, we're not going to play it, but if you take a look at verses 28 through 33, you have the actual fulfillment. Basically, King Nebuchadnezzar loses his mind, and he goes out into the gardens, and he's living like an animal for 7 years. And so his assistants keep ruling the kingdom, even though he has lost his mind during this period of time. So again, this is not like a situation where there was a coup or a rebellion, because he's still alive, he's still the king, but they can't consult him because he's acting like a madman during this period of time. But at the end of that period of time, he comes back to his senses. And could you now play verse 34 to the end of chapter 4 of the book of Daniel of the Old Testament?
At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right, and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble.
Okay, I realize that probably there are Bible scholars who will debate over this, but in my humble opinion, I think this was Nebuchadnezzar's conversion experience. I think this is an Old Testament conversion. Obviously, he doesn't say, "I believe in Jesus." Okay, that's New Testament, but it seems to me that he becomes a man of faith.
But it's very interesting, the progression. And a lot of people are in the first stages of, well, there's three, he doesn't even care about God. Then after the furnace experience, he recognizes God, but he's still the big dude. And then after the 7 years of bonkersness, he realizes that there's somebody beyond me, and that's the deal. And I think that's the conversion for us too, is many of us know about taking it now to the Christian era. Many of us know about Jesus, fine. But until we actually say, yes, I claim his sacrifice as the Lord of my life, that's when conversion happens. And I think that Nebuchadnezzar's journey, Old Testament style, fits that same progression perfectly. There's a whole lot of people sitting in church who are still in stage 2 who haven't made stage 3.
Right, so if I can put it this way, there's atheists and agnostics, but then you have a middle range, which we would call theists, people who believe in God. They may even attend church, but they've never had a salvation experience, a conversion experience. That's another phase. And so, yeah, the Lord was working in that Nebuchadnezzar a lot. But to me, this is utterly amazing, because you think of the wickedness of these world kingdoms, and yet God is still at work, even in their lives. And eventually, again, you're going to see, as we get further into Daniel, the fall of Babylon. That's after Nebuchadnezzar. And you're going to see Medo-Persia and all this other stuff. So anyway, I would encourage you, if you do have your study guide, to go ahead and bring it, but to put these sheets in there, because we're going to be coming back to them, because we're going to see Daniel's visions of these different animals, and we're going to be talking about Daniel's 70th week. And again, I don't know how strongly enough to put this, but at least in my humble brain, the 70th week of Daniel puts all these future prophecies into perspective. And I think God gave this vision to Daniel for a very specific purpose. And so we, I believe, are living in that gap between Daniel's 69th week and Daniel's 70th week. You want to call this the church age, the age of grace, the age of the Gentiles. I don't care what you call it, but it's like a time out. But God is ready to restart that clock. And that's what we talked about in the book of Revelation. All right, thank you. Again, forgive me for bypassing our study guide, but again, I wanted us to at
I
least
think it's more helpful.
give a, yeah, because we're gonna try to get all the way through Daniel in 3 weeks, so. Anyway,